Mandy, to start us off, it is so nice to meet you and to have you on the show. And I was geeking out when I was doing my research about you and learning a little bit more about who you are. And I wanted to start not in construction and not in women in trades, but I wanted to start in boxing because you are one of the most decorated Canadian Olympic boxers in history, which is absolutely insane and an amazing accomplishment. You've won 11 national championships, three continentals, a gold medal at the first Pan Ams, a bronze medal at the Commonwealth Games. It's insane. Your record is just fantastic. Could you explain how you first got into boxing, your love of the sport, and then that journey of becoming an Olympian and becoming a professional athlete?
Yeah, I guess for me, honestly, it all started just for fitness. It wasn't ever something I kind of went into thinking, hey, like I want to, go to the Olympics one day. It
Mhm.
was really just about like learning the skill of how to defend myself, how to throw a proper punch. That really drew me to the sport. So I followed, I guess, a little bit in my brother's footsteps. He was a year older than me. He was, joined the boxing club. He was getting in shape, all excited about what he was learning, and I wanted to do what he was doing. But of course, it wasn't cool to bring your little sister to the boxing club with you. It just wasn't a thing. So I actually waited till he started working full time. Then I was like, I still had this interest to go out there
Mm.
and try it. And I did. And honestly, like it changed my life forever. I fell in love with it immediately. I loved how, demanding it was, how hard it was to learn, that there was always something new to learn and something more that you could perfect. And I think that's what kept me motivated and interested, over the years. So it took me about a year of, starting to feel comfortable in a boxing gym in that environment until I started competing. And then when I did actually start competing, I realized pretty early on that I was good because I was winning
Mm.
my fights and I was winning them pretty decisively. So it was honestly just kind of one thing after another. Then I started competing like for Canada.
Mhm.
And then again, it just kind of led me to that path. So when I first started, women's boxing wasn't an Olympic sport.
Mhm.
So 2012 was actually the very first time women's boxing was in the Olympics. So it was really cool to kind of join a sport where, it was part of the advocacy, the push towards getting women into that position, which was really cool, and to see it develop from there. So when we first started, we fought to get in and we had three weight divisions, whereas we normally have 10. So
Oh,
everyone
wow.
kind of had to go down into those divisions. So it made them very, very competitive. Whereas now, actually, in this Olympics coming up this summer, there's going to be six weight classes.
Mm.
And instead of 36 girls, there's going to be like 140 girls. So it's really cool to see kind of just over the years how that's changed and progressed and become more equal between the
Mhm.
men and women side of things. So yeah, I would say like my passion, again, it's just all about the love of the sport. I think I found something. I was really fortunate, I would say, to find something that I'm passionate about, something that I really enjoyed. I had an opportunity to travel the world doing it.
Mm.
And it was just really always about how can I be better? How can I,
Mhm.
be a better version of myself? And that just honestly kept me motivated for the duration of my career.
That's fantastic. I love that answer so much. I love that it was about learning and about continual improvement and kind of this like lifelong learning, but also lifelong moving the goalpost higher and higher and higher, that there was always something that you could kind of excel at. When you look at boxing now, is there something that you're still trying to reach? Like for you, are you still motivated to be like, okay, I'm going to get this one technique? Is it a certain match against an opponent, or is it more just a personal, I would like to get better with my own technical skills? Like when you're looking at learning, what are you actually measuring?
Yeah. So as you kind of, I guess, develop into competition, it does become very, very, very technical, like at
Mm,
that elite level. All of the girls. So when you're on the Canadian national team, every time you compete, you're competing against the best person in that country. You're not just fighting
amazing.
anybody, you're
Yeah.
fighting the best of the best, right? So everybody's fit, everybody's
Hmm.
in shape, everybody's like got a good diet and ready. You know what I mean? Like, so
Hmm.
the difference between winning and losing is so, so small that you're always trying to find those little tiny like techniques or holes that you can fix. So for me, it was always about kind of learning from failure, right? Learning from
Okay.
those mistakes. And that could be as small as like, hey, why am I getting hit every time I do this specific move? To, learning from a complete competition where it's like, hey, I
Mhm.
lost that. Why did I lose that? How am I going to do something different the next time? And then trying to really just make sure that I was focusing on those things and implementing those things to get a different result. So I think it was really just always analyzing, always having those goals, always having those small little focus
Mhm.
pieces, right? For me, process was huge. What's the process? How am I going to get there so that I can get to that end result? And yeah, so that's always been, I think, a very fascinating thing and something that I really like fixated on
Yeah.
throughout my career. And now, I mean, now I'm retired, so I still train and I still, am involved in the sport, but
Mhm.
it's at a different level, right? Like I'm not as tuned in because I'm not getting ready for a competition or I don't
Mhm.
have that like end goal anymore. It's kind of like I have continued doing it because I love it, but
Yeah.
it's a little bit different now.
No, thank you. And thank you for going into the nitty-gritty because I'm like, I was just so curious about it because it's such a high level. Like it's a level of sport or a level of professionalism that I think most people, it's completely out of their scope. Like you have no idea where do you start to be like, okay, what does an Olympian even look like? Or what are you actually measuring when you're trying to get better? Like how can you get better from an Olympic perspective if you're already the best of the best? So thank you for kind of diving into like what you would focus on or how you would frame the problem. It seems like such a beautiful sport in terms of resiliency, in terms of both mental and physical strength and execution of planning. Like it's
Right.
a wonderful, wonderful sport. And I love this idea of more women entering the sport. And I know for you, one title you have is being the first female boxer to represent Canada at the Olympics. And the fact that it was an Olympic sport and wasn't recognized, and you were one of the first people to ever enter into women boxing. How was that experience and feeling with that title, if I may ask? Is like, I could only imagine that there would be a lot of pride, but I think that there also be a lot of responsibility, a bunch of eyes on you to be like, okay, well, it's a lot of pressure. Was
Mhm.
that an inspiration or was it a stressor? How was that experience of being the first representative of Canada in boxing?
Yeah, I would say it's probably a mix of both, to be
Mm,
completely honest, right? There's that pride of being able to accomplish, something and being able to go and represent your country. There's always that pride associated with that. And to be part of that first group of women was
mm,
was pretty amazing. But I think even from an early age when I started and wasn't even at that Olympic level, I think I've always really taken the role of like being a mentor very serious. And that was
mm,
always something that I wanted to make sure I portrayed properly because I know like throughout my career there have been many opportunities that have come my way, whether through sponsorship or whatever, where, you know, sometimes they want you to do things that don't necessarily fit your personality
mhm,
or the message that you want to put out there. And I've always been pretty clear about how I want to be portrayed and I want to be respected for my skill and not just be given extra attention because I'm a female and the way I look in this sport. And I think that's always been very, very important on what I put forward and what I do because I work hard, right? And I want to
mhm.
be respected for that. So that's always been very important. And then honestly, like later on in my career, especially when I have my daughter,
Aw,
KO, like it
I love
became
that
even
name.
more. Yeah, I know. Yeah. So her name's Kate Olympia, so we call her KO. But like knowing I was gonna have a little girl, it's
Mhm,
funny. Like initially, I thought I was gonna have a boy. There's boys
mm,
all over our family, mine and my husband's. And the second I found out I had a girl, it kind of hit me like, oh my God, like she's gonna be watching everything I do. Like now with the internet, they can go back, they can see everything, right? So
yeah,
it's like that became even more important to like, okay, what's the image I want to portray and how do I want to portray that? And that's always just been something that's been very important and something that I do take very seriously. So, yeah, I would say the sense of pride is definitely there, but also just making sure that you're kind of like setting the standard on like, hey, if you're going to have an opportunity to be in a position, especially in a male dominated world,
mhm.
like take that seriously. And how do you not only elevate that for yourself, but elevate that for those who are going to come behind you?
Oh my goodness, I couldn't ask for a more beautiful answer. Thank you for that. That was gorgeously stated, and I love that idea of mentorship and importance of mentorship and importance of taking maybe a position of representation really seriously to be like, okay,
Mhm.
this isn't just for me, but this is also for the next generation. And especially for your daughter, for KO, that's gorgeous in itself. When we're looking at boxing and we're looking at this influx of young women that are entering the sport and being that mentor, were there any kind of misconceptions or things like preconceived bias about the sport that you guys as athletes and like women athletes within Canada had to kind of re-educate like the general public about boxing and about women in boxing?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think even just boxing in general, because what a lot of people know about boxing, they watch a Rocky movie,
Yeah,
right? They
that's
watch
true.
they watch Million Dollar Baby and they think that's what boxing is. And they
Mhm,
like people always look at you like you don't look like a boxer, or like they expect like a certain look or feel of that person. And that's often not the case, right? Like that's not what female boxers look like. That's just what they do in the movies. And I don't know why they do that in the movies. Right? Like it's just the way it is. So part of it is just educating people. So there is a big difference between Olympic style boxing and
Mm,
professional boxing, right? So
okay.
Olympic style boxing is not prize fighting. So you're not being paid to compete, right? So it's also not necessarily the same type of entertainment where if you watch a professional boxing fight, they'll let someone get knocked out, right?
Mm,
Because that's where people get
dramatic.
excited, and it
Yeah.
just yeah, it just
Mhm,
adds to the excitement of the event. Whereas in or amateur boxing, in terms of Olympic style boxing, it's more about point scoring. It's more about getting in, getting out, hit, don't get hit. It's really fast paced. It's quick. You're fighting three-minute rounds. So
oh,
again,
wow.
the duration is a little
Yeah.
different. The gloves are made differently. There's a lot of like safety precautions
Mm,
put in place to protect the athletes. And it is like slightly different in that sense. So part of it's been educating, even just parents, right? On like,
mm,
oh, I don't know if I want my daughter to do that. Well, it's like, hey, well, did you know, here are the things that make it a safe sport, and here are the amazing things they can learn from it. That's, I think, been a really important aspect for me. And then also just, when you get the girls in the gym, I used to do like programs in high schools and stuff, and you'd kind of identify some talent really early on. Then it's just about like, okay, how do we develop them? How do we keep them interested? And it might
mhm,
not even be for them to compete, right? It's just boxing is a really great way to work out. It's a great cross training sport for any sport. But how do we keep them interested and engaged? Because I truly believe that if you know how to throw proper punches and
mhm,
defend yourself, that you carry yourself differently. You have
mhm.
different kind of confidence, and that can carry over into other aspects of your life.
No, that's fantastic. I actually didn't realize how different it was. I was
Mhm.
also no boxing from Rocky
Yeah.
and Million Dollar
Yeah.
Baby. That is my
Totally.
education in boxing. So I totally had it as the same as a professional kind of prize fight model. I didn't realize that there was such a difference. And I could see that being a big education of in terms of safety and in terms of risk profile of the sport. For a personal aside, I couldn't agree more with how martial arts or having anything relating to boxing helps young women with their confidence, and they help
Right.
them carry themselves a little bit differently. We have family friends who are 5 years old, their kids are 5, 7, and they do taekwondo, and these guys walk in like little sluggers. Like, they completely like, the amount of confidence that they have for young girls. As soon as me and my sister saw it, we were like, we never were raised in these sports, but when we
Mhm.
have daughters, we're gonna put them in boxing or we're gonna put them in taekwondo. We're gonna put them in something that they're able
Yeah,
to learn how to defend themselves because it does make a complete difference. And like
totally.
having a 5-year-old just look at you and be like, I can throw you over my shoulder. I'm like, "Oh, cool. Okay. Like, thanks. Like, please don't. Like, do you want me to make you a burger or something? Like, please, like, back off at the barbecue." But it's that level of confidence that I think it's really special with this type of sport.
Totally.
In your career, I'm just gonna ask a couple more just because 'cause I'm so interested in it, and then we'll
Yeah.
we'll we'll pivot to construction. But in your career with boxing, I'm sure you've learned so many things, and I was wondering if you could maybe what were the biggest things you've learned in terms of challenge, highlight, and then a complete surprise that you were like, "I had no idea that that was possible," or, "I was capable of that." So challenge, highlight, surprise.
Oh, there's so many things that I don't know. I'm trying to think of what direction to go in with that. I would say like there's definitely some big learning, through sport, through any sport, right? one of the big things is like controlling the controllable, right? What do you
Mm,
have control over? So, like every situation, it's easy to get overwhelmed. It's easy to kind of get into a situation where you're just, there's so many things you're trying to control, but maybe you just don't actually have the control over those things. So, I think it's helped me in that sense of just like, okay, take a bigger picture, look at the
mhm,
situation and kind of analyze things differently. My experience in Rio at those Olympic Games where I essentially, it was 13 years to get to that Olympics
mhm,
and then end up in a hospital bed,
mm,
moments before having to step into the boxing ring. And that, it really taught me about how strong I am, but it really taught me kind of a lesson I had learned over my career. And that was something my sports psychologist often said. And that was, it's not about what happens that matters, it's about how you react
mm,
that counts. And that was something that like just kept going through my mind in that situation, thinking like I could be really pissed off right now. Like I
mhm.
worked really hard
Oh,
to get to this moment
completely.
and this is
Yeah.
how it's going down, right?
Mhm,
But instead it was like, you know what? I'm going to focus. I'm going to like keep that energy. I'm not going to expend any energy on being frustrated right now. And I'm going to try to like focus on being prepared to actually be able to step into the ring. And so just how I reacted to that moment, I think became really important. And I think, you learn that in a lot of sports. Like if there's a judge in there often, there's like or a
mhm,
referee, it's
mhm,
kind of like, oh, that was a bad call. How do you react to that
mhm.
in the moment? So I think that was kind of really important as well. And then in terms of challenge, I mean, I don't think there's anything more challenging than stepping
Mhm.
into a boxing ring. Honestly, like you're
Terrifying.
stepping in
Mhm,
there, right,
mhm,
in small quarters against another person, and you're fighting them, right? Like it's as real as it gets. And to me, it's really interesting. So I run like a charity boxing event, which is a corporate event. So we get business professionals and we actually train them for 15
oh,
weeks to
wow.
box in this event. So we're kind of getting towards the end of our training camp for this right now. So it's been really interesting for me to hear their perspective because they're not boxing people. They're people who are
Mhm,
learning this in the moment, and to hear kind of their feedback and how they're processing all this information has been really interesting. And so the president of Grand Valley Construction Association, Jeff McIntyre, he's actually competing in this as
oh
well.
my
So,
goodness.
so it's kind of fun because at work, we're talking a lot about strategy, but just to hear kind of, even yesterday he was saying like they had a sparring session. He was like, I was getting hit with all of these different things, and it almost felt like I felt like brand new again. Like what
Mm,
happened? And to see him like analyzing that and then realizing, okay, like what can I do differently? How can I change that? How can I have a better session tonight? And to
mhm,
like just see that process happening where it's like, these are all little things that you're going to learn and be able to take into other aspects of your life. And to me, that's always really amazing to see kind of what you can learn about yourself in a boxing ring.
mhm.
Cause a lot of people see that opponent, but really when you're in there, like you're fighting yourself. You're trying to push yourself to a different limit. And it's just about who can do that the
Mm,
best, right? That is ultimately gonna perform the best. So I think that's always been a challenge.
mm. That's very, very interesting. Like I couldn't imagine too. I agree completely with having no background in boxing. Agree completely that boxing is probably the scariest thing to do or the biggest challenge. Like I think that probably wouldn't get into the ring. And I think most people might end there of just being like, nope, you know what? I don't know. I don't know if this is for me. Like it's a terrifying, very raw, kind of vulnerable process. Like you have to be
Yeah.
both physically and also mentally, of just being like that act of being like, "Okay, I'm gonna go fight an opponent," and all of the work that has gone into it, and then it's a dynamic kind of in the moment decision making and strategy and on your feet thinking. I could imagine it being absolutely very, very hard to do. Um,
Yeah.
if we're talking about what happened at Rio, I think that that was such a beautiful answer that you did that as your not a highlight necessarily, but as like the biggest learning. And maybe that should be like the dictionary definition of resiliency and the way that you completely did a mindset change. How was that experience with it? Because I think like most people would be really upset. I think I would be really upset. And I think you
Yeah.
have every validity to be upset.
Yeah.
Was that something that came like you said, your sports psychologist helped you with that. Was that something that came with community? Was that something that came with time to be able to have that mental fortitude to be like, okay, you know what? I'm going to control my reaction here in a event that I think would realistically unravel most people. Like, how did that mental
Yeah.
fortitude happen?
Honestly, like I think over the years that had been kind of drilled in a
Mm.
lot. And that's why it was really strange to me. Like it just honestly, like I was laying there in this hospital bed, this IV in my arm, and
Mm.
this is what's going through my head. And I was like, I had no energy. I was completely exhausted. And like this just kept going through. And I'm like, ugh. I never really
Mm.
got it until that moment where it was like he would write this down and we would talk about it all the time. And then when I was sitting there, I was like, oh, that's what he means.
It's
um,
today.
yeah, it's today. It's the
Yeah.
day that I don't want it to be. So yeah, I don't know. I think it honestly, it's just kind of over time, it was something that was kind of drilled in. And there's always a choice, I think, right? Like you
Mm.
always have a choice on how you're going to react to things. Your effort and your attitude are two things that you always control. And I
Mm.
think that that was my opportunity to really just show that and, make roll with the punches and make the best of that situation.
Well, thank you. Thank you for diving into it. And I think that's pretty incredible that that's been the attitude. Because again, I think it's easy to say, it's hard to do, especially in a environment in a situation like that that has a lot of emotion to it. So thank you for going into it. I think even in the last, just the way that you've held yourself and the way that you've answered these questions have been so thoughtful and so beautiful. But the last one to talk about to boxing is, I mean, most of us will never be Olympians. We have no concept of what it means to be an Olympian or even a professional athlete. But if there is something that you think that most average people or most people who are not Olympians, not on that path, is there something that you think from your experience as an Olympian that they could learn? Like if they were able to kind of channel that mindset or your Olympian mindset, what would that look like, and what could they take from your experience and maybe put into their day to day?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. I think the growth mindset is probably one
Mm.
of the biggest, right? Like that was always huge for me. I think like really early on in my career, I would make decisions based on, something would come my way and it was like, okay, is this going to help me get closer to my goal? And if it was, I would do it.
Mhm.
If it wasn't, I'd say no. And it really became like it was because I knew where I wanted to go, right? I had that
Mhm.
focus, I had that desire, and I had the discipline to be able to get to that goal, right? So
Mhm.
just really just breaking that down, I think was really, really important. And then finding those opportunities for growth. And I know like even in the business world, right? We're learning from failures all the time. We're trying
Mhm.
to look at those things and say, hey, is that going to make me better? How do I get better? How do I get a different result the next time? So I think those things are really important. Just always looking for ways to move forward, overcome obstacles. I mean, life is going to throw obstacles your way. That
Mhm.
is completely normal. And, one of the ways I always look at it is like, there have been a lot of obstacles in my career, but I never let those obstacles become barriers. And I
Mm.
think that's so important, just because to me, a barrier is like a wall, something you just cannot get through, right? That's going to stop you in your path. Whereas an obstacle is something you can get around, right? You can go over it, you can go under it, you can go around it, you can be creative. And I think just being able to look at situations and say, is this an obstacle? Okay, it is. Maybe it's a little setback, but then how am I going to figure out how do I get back on my path and where I want to go? So I think obviously it starts with that vision, starts with where do you want to
Mhm.
go, and then figuring out kind of how you can get there by just always looking for ways to grow and to get better and to get closer to that goal.
I love the answer of growth mindset. It's interesting because I had a complete different definition of growth mindset. Like I had it a little bit of, I think, less defined. I think less like having an end goal. And sometimes I think with me, it's just taking chances on things of like something comes up and like, oh, I've actually have no idea how this is associated to my end goal, but might as well try. Like that was always my
Yeah.
definition of growth
Yeah.
mindset. But I
Yeah.
love that laser focus of being like, okay, like, and it makes sense with competing at such a high level of being like focused from day one of being like, okay, this is my path and this is where I want to take it. And I like the fact that having no barriers in your life basically, or like change keeping a barrier from changing it into a wall and maybe poking a couple holes in it and changing it to an opportunity to be like, okay, well, even if it was a failure, what do we learn from this and how do we move on? I think that's a fantastic life lesson that anyone can take from. I think that's very inspiring.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, good. And I know that this is something that I think is really, really interesting. And I would love to hear the origin story of this kind of next pivot and this next kind of career is of life lesson and growth mindset too, is that this is something completely new to you, is that you've entered a new field of construction, working with Grand Valley Construction Association as the manager of industry and community partnerships. Could you maybe explain a little bit how that happened, how you entered this new
Mhm.
space, the mission of GVCA, if people are unaware of it, and then the responsibilities of your new role? And take your time because I know that's a big old question.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say construction, like this is definitely a new industry and it was a big kind of scary step, I would say, and
Mm,
a scary step in my sense of officially retiring from sport, right? That was the scary part for
yeah.
me was like, okay, I'm officially done. I actually have a 15-month-old at home
Oh,
too. So it
congrats.
was like, she had just kind of get to that point where it's like, okay, I got to start thinking about childcare. What's next for me? Where am I going to go?
Mhm.
And, I happened to know the president of GVCA, didn't know he was the president. Like we've just been friends and over the years.
Mm,
He actually came to try out for my charity event. And when I saw him at the tryout, I remember just being like, hey, do you want to go for a coffee and, have a
mhm.
conversation on like, I just knew he was well connected in the community, kind of knowing what's going on. So I just wanted to say like,
Hi.
what should I do next?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we just started talking about kind of what's my interest and where do I see myself and where do I want to go and what does a perfect day look like and what are some of the challenges right now with
Mhm,
having two young kids, right? Like it kind of I feel like limits me a little bit in terms of, being available for drop off and pickups and all of
mhm,
those things. And anyway, so it just ended up that they had an opportunity where it was like, you know what, for me, I really love building community, bringing
mhm,
people together for a common cause. And I think, when I started learning about the Grand Valley Construction Association and they're a multi-trade association. So they work
mm,
with obviously the contractors and then subtrades as well. And then, their mandate is really about just being relevant to the needs of their members, right? What are their members want? What do they need? How do we kind of continue to adapt with that and make sure that we're kind of relevant, right?
mhm,
And how do we kind of add value to what they're doing? So to me, that was really interesting. And I think, my role on like the partnership side of things is really just at this point, it's been a lot of information gathering. Obviously, I'm still just a few months into the role. So I've been doing things like my Green Book course and my
mhm.
working at Heights course and just to learn the language and to learn, the people and how the businesses work and meet, the people behind the scenes. I've also been trying to be on construction sites at least once a week where it's just
Mm,
like I actually just want to like understand what's happening, see the different projects, see how things come together. Cause to me, that's really fascinating because again, like you're seeing that end goal, right? Like you
mhm.
have like, here's what you're building. And then you see the progress as you're
Yeah.
going along, the teamwork that's involved in being able to do that. There's so many really, really interesting pieces for me on that side of things. So thinking about even just health and safety is
Mhm,
obviously a big conversation in the construction world. And I think for me, initially, it was like hearing all these conversations of health and safety. And obviously, there's like protocols and things that have to be in place for job sites.
mhm,
But a lot of it to me seemed like a safety thing and not necessarily a health thing. And so again, right there, I was like, you know what? I think that we could start something. So we started a new program called Fit to Build.
love
And
it.
it's really just about being fit for duty, right? When you're
Mhm,
showing up to work, are you physically fit? Are you mentally fit? Are
mhm,
you prepared for the work that you're about to do? So we started just like a couple classes doing some fitness stuff to try to get people thinking about their health. And again, we're still just trialing this out. We did like an 8-week program. We're getting
mhm.
towards the end of it now, but trying to get some feedback to say, hey, how do you feel? Do you feel better? Do you like, has this helped you in your
Yeah.
work environment? So it's been a little bit of that. And then also doing a lot of just conversations and sharing my story, right?
Mm,
So there's a lot of, I think, similarities between boxing and construction,
Mhm.
and trying to kind of give a different perspective. I feel like when you hear from the same people all the time, you kind of get used to, okay, that message, and maybe it doesn't resonate as much or for everybody. So I think being able to come in there and talk about things from a different lens might just kind of mix things up a bit and just say, okay, how can we, whether it's, building a team, whether it's, overcoming obstacles, whether it's just, that project fatigue that I'm hearing a lot about in terms of like
Yeah.
how long these projects are. And, the motivation from the very beginning is very different than,
At the
middle
end.
of the winter.
Yeah.
Yeah, middle of the
Yeah.
winter on a job site when,
Yeah.
timelines aren't being met. That's very different, right? And I think there's a lot of similarities to the sport world in that sense. So yeah, so I think it's been really interesting just to kind of navigate, hear stories, and be like, oh, okay, like I could totally relate
Mhm.
to that. Not in the same world, but I can totally relate to that because here are the things that I see in the other side of things. So I think it's been really fun. It's been really interesting to learn.
Oh my goodness. That's amazing. There's so many things that I would love to dive into and do like another whole episode on it, just that one episode or one answer is Mandy, you have no idea how happy it makes me to hear that you're doing this kind of grassroots approach to this new role in this new environment and really immersing yourself within kind of the culture and the systematic kind of organization and even to the fact that you're doing like these type of trainings of like training at heights like things that you don't need but to be like okay
Yeah.
let's
No.
better understand the world is just so
Yeah.
incredible and it's testament to you, but also to the organization, to GVCA. Like, I think that's just a fantastic way to look at management and look at kind of community partnership is really immersing yourself in that environment. But I love that you're also coming at it from a completely different viewpoint from boxing. But I agree with you. I think that there's a lot in terms of similarities, but also strengths that you have from the sporting world of looking at. I mean, construction is this big, dynamic, ever changing thing that is chaotic. There's always going to be mistakes. You can only control like 5% of the industry. 90% of things are out of your control. And it's all in
Right.
terms of mindset and working as a team. So that in itself is the exact same thing from sport. It really is.
Totally. I think that was actually one of the things that, in one of my early conversations really stood out to me that like, so my dad worked construction, my
Mm,
brothers are in construction, my uncles, like I've been around the talk a little bit, throughout my life, but actually going on a job site is very different than
mhm.
walking by it or driving by it.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
I will say, like, and it's really interesting because like the first time I went on a job site, honestly, it felt exactly like walking into a boxing gym 16 years
Mm,
ago. Like you're kind of unsure, you definitely
mhm.
feel outnumbered as a female. You're kind of like, yeah, it was a really interesting feeling, and it brought me back to
Mm,
when I first started boxing and being in that environment. And again, I can see how it's intimidating for some women. I
mhm,
can see how some women thrive in that environment because I'm kind of on that side where I like it, that motivates me, right?
mhm,
But it was definitely very interesting. But the one thing too that you said about when a new project happens, to think that like every time there's a new project, you have a superintendent, and then you have foremans from all of these other companies, and everyone sometimes is working together for the first time.
mhm.
And you have to now come and bring all of these personalities
Yeah.
together and make something, like physically make something. Like that's challenging. That's really challenging. And to make sure that like, the constructor can get their
Mhm,
culture across and make sure like their safety culture and their culture of excellence and how they want things to move forward. Like that's a really tough job, and it really comes down to managing personalities and getting people to work together, and it's a lot like coaching, right? Like
mhm,
it's really really interesting, and I think that's the part that really fascinates me is how it all comes together in the end.
mhm. Oh, I love that. No, because it is. It's like I couldn't have said it better myself. Like it is a complete challenge of teamwork. And like I think one big thing that is missing from that is not only are you working all together, but it's also working on time and on budget, which is
Totally.
like that's also added stressors and added chaos within this kind of this very, very dynamic system. It's just fantastic, this mindset, and I do wanna spend one little bit before we move on is just on the importance of health. And I love that you brought in that program. I know it's something new, but I think that that's, if we're looking at how do you get a culture and how do you get good culture really quickly, I do think if you focus on teamwork and you focus on health is something that's good for a team, good for alignment, but it's also so needed in this culture. There's huge problems in mental health, there's huge problems in burnout. There's a lot of stuff that as a construction industry we're trying to work on. I think it's incredible that you guys are doing these programs.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that like I saw right away as
Mhm,
like this could be like again, because when you especially like when you're physically doing something, you naturally release these endorphins, right? That
mm,
make you feel better. They help your mood. They help you in so many different ways. They help your focus. So I think like even if it's just as simple as, you know, having conversations about, hey, before you go and, lift that 30-pound
mhm.
object up a set of stairs, like have you thought about like, just doing a little bit of a warm up, doing something very, very small and simple. But again, just thinking about like the longevity of that person's
Mhm,
career and not getting injured and like overall just making a healthier work environment. I think there's so many little pieces that can play into that. But and I definitely do want to dig deeper. Like I really want to get in and understand kind of the mindset of especially the people in trades. I think that's where
mhm,
I'm really most curious about and like just getting to know them and seeing how we can do things that they're actually going to be interested in because they work hard. Like it is
mhm.
hard physical work. So then to say, hey, come and do this other training on top of that is really hard, right? So,
Yeah,
maybe for them it's more on the, the mental performance side of things or the mindset or the mental health side of things, but just giving them tools on,
how
how
to
they
do that.
can,
Mhm.
yeah, how they can do that and how they can tap into resources that they might need.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I love that. I think that's incredible. I know two passions in your life that's been kind of a constant. I think we've obviously touched on boxing as being the first be all end all, which I love. And then the second one we briefly talked about is philanthropy and working within the community. And you've been community centered. I mean, that was a joy to read when I was researching you, is just community centered and working with organizations. What lessons from these kind of two passions do you think that you've brought into the construction industry? And I don't know if we've maybe talked a little bit about the sport, the role of sport and the role of boxing in terms of construction, but so maybe leaning heavily on the second one of like community organizations. How have you brought that experience into your new role?
Yeah, and again, I think for me, like it's really cool coming into this role as an association, right? We have,
Mhm.
about 700 member companies and they
Yeah.
have, all of their staff. So there's a
Thousands of
lot,
people.
yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot of people, a
Yeah.
lot of companies from small to
Mm,
big. And how do we make them feel a part of something? How do we make them feel a part of something bigger and something important and something that's actually moving things forward? That's I think where I really want to put my focus, as I
mm,
kind of dig into this role a little bit more is just like, really just hearing those people, what are things that we can do to help them just better their business, better, you know, the way they work with other companies, the way that we're just building community, right? Physically and metaphorically. And I think it's important, for us at GVCA, it's our anniversary this year, our 50th anniversary. So we're focusing a lot on giving back. Everything that we're
mm.
doing, there's a component of giving back to the community. And I know that the construction world is really good at this because I received support from the
Yeah.
construction world when I was boxing, and I think that's really cool and it's a really strong way to say like, hey, this community matters, the people in
Mhm.
this community matter, and I think that that's kind of a really nice way to kind of to bring people together.
Mhm. No, I love that. I also think too that the construction industry, not only do they give back to like people and organizations, I think in a fantastic way, I think it's also so foundational to society that they give back in such a practical, like structural way too, which
Yeah,
is really
yeah,
nice, right? Like
yeah.
it's very impactful. I feel like the give back that they do has a big reach in communities, which is
Yeah, and I
fantastic.
think I think the cool thing too is like again growing up with a construction dad, like every time we're driving by something, it's like, oh, I built that building or I built that
Yeah.
like there's a
The
sense of
classic.
pride,
Yeah.
right? And I
Yeah.
think that that's so important, right? How do we like celebrate that success and make them feel like, hey, yeah, that was really important. You played an
Mhm.
important role, even if you're a laborer or you're, whatever that might be. Like that role was important into building this community. And I think that we need to kind of celebrate that a little bit more and just kind of I don't know, bring attention to that a bit more because I think that is really important. I know they're proud of it, and to actually be able to drive by something and see that final project is
Mhm.
pretty cool.
Oh my god, it's incredible. Like, I feel like still to this day, like, yeah, everybody I know in construction and everybody in my life in construction, I can tell you every single building in
Yeah.
Vancouver that they've made. You know what I mean? Like, that pride is
Totally.
real. Like,
Yeah.
I love it. So I love that that's the focus as what you guys are doing, and congrats on your anniversary. That's incredible. And I love this kind of idea of give back as an organization. If I could go back to role, and I know this has been really relatively new, but what has been the biggest learning curve so far within this new sector and kind of what has helped you overcome it? But if that's not really there yet, maybe what are you really excited about working on, or where do you want to go? I know you want to talk to people and kind of figure out where they are, but yeah, so either or for that question.
Honestly, I mean, the biggest learning curve I would say is really just meeting with people, right? And kind
Mhm.
of understanding the language
Mm,
is always kind of a new
jargony.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of acronyms.
Yeah.
Every
Everything
time I
is an
hear,
acronym.
I know. Every time I hear an acronym, I'm like, wait, what is that again? And it's funny because a lot of time people are like, yeah, actually, what does that stand for? They're just so used to saying the acronym that they don't
Mhm.
actually know how to break it down. So
It's true.
there's always that. And I think that happens in any role or any new position. But honestly, it's been a lot easier than I would say other roles that I've gone into in terms of, I feel like the people are just real. They're genuine
Mhm.
people. Everyone I've met have been very, very inviting and very open to like hearing ideas, having conversations. And I think that that's really nice and nice to be a part of. And then, moving forward, we are going to try to shake things up a little bit, right?
Mhm.
To try to do things differently because I think it's important, right? If you keep doing things the same, you're going to get the same results. How do we try to shake things up, especially when we're looking at, the women in construction side of things, right?
Mhm.
Like we're kind of seeing across the board that, you're 3 to 5%, across Canada.
Stagnant. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's staying that way. And I
Mhm.
I went to tour Conestoga's trade campus the other day, and their registration is exactly the same. So it's obviously going to continue for the next few years. So trying to figure out how do we get more women interested is definitely an area that I want to do a bit more like research. I know we're
Mhm.
looking at doing a partnership with the university to do some research on that. Like who are these women? How do we attract more women? How do we retain those women?
Mhm.
I think there's some pieces there. And then also just like creating an environment where they feel comfortable, where we can actually get to know them. Like I haven't met that many
Yeah.
of the women in the trades yet. I've on site slightly, like there's been a couple, but I want to have conversations with them and kind of
Mhm.
learn because like, even just listening to your podcast, I hear about some of those struggles. I hear about some of those things that they're going through, and I can definitely relate to a lot of those things. But I think it's important even from like an association side of things for us
Mhm.
to learn and understand, and how do we learn from those things and how do we try to make things better. And I think that's kind of where I want to focus.
Oh, that's a perfect answer. No, I love that. I love that focus on women in trades and kind of looking at women in male dominated environments because I think it's so applicable to your life and also the fact that I know at one point of rallying the Canadian government and also rallying the Olympic Committee to be like, we deserve to be viewed as athletes and viewed within the Olympics, right? So like having that within your background and kind of having that understanding of what it takes of being maybe the first or the only or maybe the few in an industry,
Yeah.
right? Like to have
Yeah.
that being your background and then also just being like, how do we organize ourselves now? That like there's one in every single site, but how do we get together and actually tell stories and
Exactly. Yeah.
and become a community?
Totally.
And I love that call out of being like that, yes, everything's new and it might be like jargon of like learning, but I love that it's been okay because the people have been so kind. I think I
Yeah.
found the same thing within this environment for the most part is like I don't work in construction, but I think mining camps are basically a large construction site and very similar.
Right.
Is that the people are lovely. Like they're really kind, salt of the earth people. They're
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of women in trades, and I love that as an association, you guys are working with the university and plan to do a bunch of research. Could you maybe speak to, if you have anything, of like your preliminary stuff of what you guys are finding in terms of like what's the importance of community and what's the impact of maybe having more women in construction? Like what are you hoping to see, I guess, as an industry in a whole?
Yeah, so we just started having the conversation, so we haven't actually started the research yet, but
Mm,
that is kind of in the short term future, I would say. But yeah, we're definitely looking at, and I think it's kind of stemmed from some of the conversations I've been having
mm,
early on. I feel like there's a bit of a mix even kind of within the women in construction.
mhm,
There's kind of like I would say two camps. There's kind of like the women in construction that they want that safe environment. They
mhm.
want that area where they can just like share, tell stories, get together with like-minded women and support each other. And then there's kind of some other women that I feel like are they want to be part of something bigger and they want to like for lack of better words like break the door down and like let
Yeah.
men in so they can hear the stories. They want to like create these allies with the men that they're working with and they want to be able to attract more women and bring them forward by doing things that are maybe outside the box. So I've been kind of hearing from two different groups of
Mm.
women and it's really interesting because I think there's a time and place for
For
both. I
both.
think
Yeah.
there's I think there's an importance of having that safe space and that space where you can kind of grow and learn from each other. But then I do think that the only way the men are going to learn how to work with women, especially in the trades, is
Yeah.
if they hear from us and they
Mm,
understand how they want like the women want them to work with them. And again, I had very similar situations when I was starting out. There wasn't a lot of men in the boxing, or a lot of, I was the only female, right? There wasn't a
mhm.
lot of females in the boxing gym. I was working with men all the time. And then I had to kind of have conversations with them in terms of, hey, you know what? When we're sparring together and we're punching each other, if I land a good shot, you can come back and obviously hit me, but
Yeah.
like, you can't hit me full power because there's a difference between a man's strength and a woman's strength.
Mhm.
And as simple as that sounds, it's like having to have those conversations and just explain that is like, oh, okay. Like just don't think about it because they never
Mhm.
really had to work with women at the time, right? Like
Totally.
I was kind
Yeah.
of one of the first women that they were sparring with, so they didn't know that there had to be a difference in how they did things, right? So I think it really comes down to having some of those open conversations and just straight up saying, "Hey, you know what? I get that you've never had to work with women, but this is kind of
Yeah.
what we want. And this is kind of what's going to make us feel better and make us feel comfortable in that environment." And I think it's important to have those conversations because how are they going to know if we don't tell them?
Mhm.
I just feel like we got to educate them. We got to give them the resources to and give them the opportunity to learn. And then, of course, if they, if you tell them and they don't do it, then that's a whole different story.
That's on yeah.
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 But I do think that there needs to be almost and again, I don't know if it needs to be women in construction. We're kind of playing with the idea of the future of
Mm,
construction because it's not necessarily just women, right? We want
mhm,
to we want to think about some of those groups that are underrepresented as
mhm,
well, diversity, all of those things within the construction world. So how do we start having those conversations to make sure those people feel comfortable? But there's almost like this, I don't know, I feel like a task force of people who want to move forward and
mhm,
actually like whether it's lobbying for these things to happen or whether it's education or whether it's resources, whatever it might be. I think there's a group that really wants to kind of push things forward and I think we need to bring them together, right? Because I
mhm.
think from what I'm hearing there's a lot of people doing a lot of little things in their own way and they're all important. But I think like, oh my God, imagine if everyone came
The
together
power.
and
Mhm.
yeah, there's the power in numbers of being able to work together and be like, hey, like this is how we move things forward, I think would be very impactful.
I think so too. I think that would be like that's kind of the next step. I agree with that of being like, okay, we're so geographically also separated as well. I feel
Right.
like there's also so
Right.
many little different committees in every single province and about every single
Yeah,
city. So
totally.
I do agree that like if we could have some I don't know. I don't know what it would look like, but if we could have some
Yeah.
unity, I think that our message would be broadcasted to like 1,000. Like it would just be amped up in such
Right.
an exponential way. I love that kind of definition of having the two camps and maybe like that they are both important and they have a space for both of them. I couldn't agree more with that. I always love having a safe space of having just like a women's kind of only area where you can have conversations and you can have this kind of security. But that definition of being like sometimes having those conversations and they might be obvious to us, but very, very difficult or like
Yeah.
completely unknown to them. One thing that I always think of is we were doing a dry dock. I worked on a research vessel and we were doing a dry dock. We were at port and I had a boss come up to me and he was getting really upset because he was like, I can't find you anywhere and you're skipping work. Like you're not working and you're constantly gone. And in dry dock, you have no access. The boat is completely shut down. You have no power, you have no water, you have no nothing. And I was like, I don't have a bathroom. And he was like, excuse you? And I was like, my bathroom at port, because I am one of the only women, is half an hour away. Every single time that I have to go to the washroom, I have to put on my little, I have to go on a half an hour walk there and back to go to the washroom. And we're in the Philippines in 40-degree weather with like no HVAC, no nothing, and I'm just downing water. I have to go to the washroom a fair bit, unfortunately, just because of this heat. And like it's taken me a half an hour walk every single time. And it was that something that was so obvious that like it was just a structural problem. And he had no idea. The next day,
Right.
there was an Alexis porty potty to be like, this
Nice.
is for you, and this is like you can now do your job. But it took
Right.
having that maybe that like uncomfortable
Yeah.
conversation, which is being like, it's a little different for us.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's like a perfect example, right? Exact same thing where it's like if you didn't tell them, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes it is, it's an
Yeah.
uncomfortable, it's like, really, you don't realize this, but it's maybe it's just not top of mind, right? They're
Hmm.
just maybe not, they're just overlooking that or whatever it might be. I like to give people the benefit of the
Benefit.
doubt.
Hmm.
But yeah, like I think at least making sure that you're like open about that and being okay with having those tough conversations. And then you never know the result, right? Like you
Yeah.
could obviously makes a better environment for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, Mandy. I'll leave it there. I'll
Yeah.
give you back your time, but just thank you so much. This was just such a lovely conversation. It was so nice getting to meet you and getting this opportunity to speak with you. And I'm just fascinated by everything that you're doing. I'm so excited for this next role and kind of your future with the association and all of the work you guys are doing. But just thank you also for deep diving into boxing because it's fascinating and it's
Thank you.
incredible what you've done.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me.
This has been an absolute joy. So thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.